My current boyfriend and I, we began dating in 2015 and we moved in together into a new house about a year after that. We had just graduated from college, got our first real job, and therefore budget for rent was tight, to say the least. The house that we ended up renting was an old Victorian-style property. I believe it is nearly 100 years old, and the age really shows when you go inside the house. I didn't like the property from the get-go. It wasn't the age of the house that bothered me the most. In fact, I didn't mind that at all, as long as the rent was affordable, which it was. The only thing was though, and this may sound a little stupid, but I just didn't have a good feeling about the property. I know it sounds ridiculous, but it just didn't feel right. It didn't feel right being in there. But in any event, Ron insisted that we should rent the house because we weren't going to get anything better at that price range. He was right too, and I couldn't continue insisting on moving elsewhere on feelings alone. As you might have guessed, we ended up taking the place. The first day, as it is on any moving day, things were hectic and we were so fatigued like you wouldn't believe it. By nighttime, we unpacked what we could, put together the bed, and I let Ron take a shower first. I went into the shower after Ron was done. I was enjoying the hot water running down from my head to toe when I felt something rubbing on my back. For a second there, I thought it was Ron having his fun. But when I turned around to see his arm poking in through the shower curtain, I found myself to be alone in the shower. It was really peculiar because I swear I felt a hand. Creeped out, I quickly finished the shower and stepped out of the bathroom. Then I was walking toward our bedroom when something slapped a hair in the back of my head and I could hear the droplets of water hitting the wall. I stopped, touched my hair, and looked around. Sure enough, I could see the slightly dampened spots on the wall. I stood in the hallway trying to figure out what I might have bumped into, but it didn't take long for me to realize that I hadn't bumped into anything. Creeped out even more, I went into the bedroom, got under the blanket, and borrowed a tiny space to squeeze into in between Ron's arms. I felt safe in there and had a good night's sleep. The next day, Ron stepped out first because it takes half an hour longer for him to get to his place of work. I thought about stepping out with him, but then it didn't feel right that I felt unsafe in my own home. I decided to tough it out and try to get used to being alone in the house. That was a big mistake. Not long after Ron had stepped out, I began hearing footsteps coming from the smaller bedroom that we decided to use as an office. Thump, thump. The footsteps were heavy with presence. That was more than enough scare for me to run out of the house and seek shelter in my car. I went to work, and once in the office, I decided to do a little experiment. Nothing happened in the office, but then I was with other people. It made sense to me at the time that I should go to the restroom, stay there alone to see if I would still feel or hear things. In the restroom, I locked myself in one of the stalls and waited for another person to finish washing their hands and get out. After about a minute, I was alone. My heart was pumping at the speed of light, and I was sweating like a pig, even though I rarely sweat, even on a really hot summer day. I waited in there for 10 minutes, but nothing happened. You might think that I might have been happy about that, but I really wasn't. I was hoping that it was all in my head, and therefore that I would feel and hear things when I was left alone in the restroom. If that were the case, I just needed to grow a pair in a manner of speaking and try to get over the fear of the new house. However, as I had mentioned, nothing happened in the restroom. It wasn't a guarantee, but now it was more likely that strange things were truly happening in our new house. I went home after work and explained everything to Ron. Surprisingly, he wasn't dismissive, nor did he try to make light of the situation. Basically, he made it clear that he didn't believe in ghosts or spirits. However, he told me that he knew me well enough to know that I'm not someone to get spooked so easily. He believed something strange was happening to me in the new house, But just like me, he didn't know exactly what was causing those things. Weeks went by, and in that time, I was relentlessly haunted by the presence in the house. Whatever it was sneaky and devious. It would never touch me when Ron had direct sight of me. If it did, it would touch me from under the table and freak me out like that. If I had a boyfriend who wasn't as patient and open-minded as Ron, then you'd be sure I would have been dumped a dozen times over. But he stood by me and did what he could to protect me. Then one day, I was in the bedroom changing when Ron walked in. He looked at me and I saw his jaw fall to the floor. Maybe 5 seconds had passed by when Ron grabbed my hand and nearly threw me out of the room. Outside of the house, he explained to me that my hair was floating in the air, one pointing to the left and another to the right. They moved as though two invisible hands were making my hair dance. The movement was direct and purposeful. On top of that, when was the last time you saw a draft coming into a room, split your hairs into two, and pull them in separate directions? I know the answer to that. Never. Ron had finally witnessed what was happening to me for nearly 2 months, and it took me out of the house on that very day. He took me to a hotel and told me that he didn't care how much it would cost us to keep me out of the house. Every day, he brought me the things I needed, and we stayed at the hotel for the next 2 months. We made a deal with the landlord to pay the rent until the house was rented out to new tenants. That took a month and a half, then it took us about 2 weeks to find a new place. The haunting stopped once we began sleeping in the hotel, and all was good at the new place we rented as well. I feel sorry to the new people who have moved into our old place, but personally, I can't tell you how happy I am that the spirit is bound to the house and not me. I wish I could warn people of that house, but I'm sure I'll be slapped with a lawsuit if I did that publicly. It took 2 months for my boyfriend, who by the way lived with me, to see for himself what was truly happening to me in that house. I don't even want to imagine explaining, let alone proving a true haunting in a court of law. As bad as I feel for not warning others of that house, a lawsuit is another nightmare that I refuse to get involved in. I'm sure the landlord knows exactly what's happening in his house. I mean, how could he not when his tenants are constantly moving out? I pray to God that he will rot in hell one day for all the minds he scarred for his rent money. The man deserved to burn in hell. I was in bed one night, completely asleep, when I was awoken by the sensation of something prodding on my feet. Half awake, I tell Amanda, my girlfriend who's sleeping right next to me, to cut it out. I try to go back to sleep, but then she does it again. I rub my eyes, sit upright, and the plan is to slap her foot, but then I see a young girl standing at the foot of my bed. I utter in confusion and dismay, "What in the hell?" I'm a little spooked, but at the same time, I feel bad. You see, it may be a ghost that I'm seeing, but it's still a little girl, and she looks really sad. So I change my tune and ask the young one, "Hey, how did you get in here?" But she says nothing back. Then I go, "Listen, it doesn't matter. Tell me where you live and I'll take you home." Still nothing. "Okay, can you tell me the phone numbers of your parents or your home, maybe?" The young girl still says nothing, and so I shake the leg of my girlfriend to wake her up, but she doesn't respond at all. That's when the young girl grabs my hand and gently pulls on it as if she wants me to follow her. I get up and the young girl leads me toward the bedroom door, then points on the doorknob so I would open the door. We go past the kitchen, the living room, and finally arrive at the front door. The young girl once again points at the doorknob, and so I proceed to open the door. Once outside, we walk 2 blocks toward the cul-de-sac, then finally stop in front of a 2-story house. Then suddenly she lets go of my hand, runs toward the door, then disappears right through it. Yeah, I think that's the best way to describe it. It didn't look as though her body just evaporated into thin air, but rather more like she melted through the door. I stood there for a short while, but then soon realized how creepy I must look if someone was watching me at that very moment. I went back home and sat on my couch in shock of what I had just witnessed. I had a tiny bit of suspicion at first that I was either dreaming or seeing a ghost, but then as soon as the young girl grabbed my hand, that's when I was assured that she was just a child. While we were walking toward the two-story house, I didn't think for a second that I was holding hands with a spirit. But what else could it be? She's either a ghost, or I must have lost my mind for 10 minutes or so when I was with the girl. Whatever the case may be, I fell asleep and woke up on the couch in the morning. The time was 7, and I had this incredible urge to retrace my steps from last night. I put on some clothes, then began walking toward the two-story house. I stopped in my tracks a block away from the house. There were 2 police cruisers and an ambulance in front of the house. I hesitated going forward at first, but at the same time, I desperately wanted to find out what was happening. I walked toward the scene, and there were a few neighbors out on the street talking to one another. I asked one of the ladies, "Hi, what happened?" The lady responds, "I think the Livingstone's daughter passed away last night." I didn't see it, but one of our neighbors says she saw her body being carried out into the ambulance. Oh my god, it's just so terrible. I turned around and walked away in complete shock. I remember calling in sick to work that day and staying in bed the entire morning and afternoon. The trauma from the experience actually made me sick. I mean, physically ill. I was able to get up and walk around in the evening, but mentally I was completely drained. It took me a good part of the month to fully recover from the experience, and I'm okay today. I think it took me that long to feel mentally balanced again because I could speak to no one about what I had experienced. I didn't know I would feel like this at first, but as I write down the story, it feels good and it sort of gives me closure to the whole thing. You know, wherever the young girl might have gone to, I truly hope she is in a better place. The time was close to midnight, and I was driving home after work. I had just merged onto a parkway, and as the time would suggest, the road was void of cars. I was really tired after a long day at the restaurant, but unfortunately for me, I had another 20 minutes of drive on the parkway before I could go home and get some much needed rest. 5 minutes in on the parkway, a taillight of a car appears out of nowhere, so I slam on the brakes as I swerve onto the shoulder. I'm at a full stop on the side of the road, and it feels like my heart's pumping 1,000 times a second. The other car is still parked on the right lane of the parkway, and it isn't moving at all. I think for a second if I should go check on the driver or if it'd be better to call the police. Truthfully, I much prefer leaving the job to the cops, but it's just too dangerous to leave a car parked in the middle of the road. I get out of my car and walk toward the parked vehicle. Before I could walk up to the driver, I hear the tires screeching and the car speeds off, giving me another near heart attack. I'm standing there totally dumbfounded when I realize that I'm standing in the middle of a road. I quickly get back to my car and give myself a minute to collect my thoughts. Before I saw the parked car, my eyes were fully fixated on the road. I was tired, but I wasn't nodding off or losing my concentration. There was no way that I could have missed the taillight of a car before coming that close to a collision. And yet, that's exactly what happened. A few more yards and I would have hit that car. How does that happen? Regardless, I have to go home, and so I get back on the road. I drive for another mile when a car approaches from behind at a high rate of speed. The car has its high beam on, and I'm now driving half blind. I proceed to merge onto the left lane and give the high beam car a clear path to pass me. The only problem is, it doesn't. Instead, it follows me onto the left lane and it continues to match my speed. This is not a normal behavior, and I'm really scared. I try to clear the path once more, and so I merge onto the right lane. That's when the car tries to ram my car from the side, and I instinctively swerve toward the shoulder as I hit the brake as hard as I possibly can. My car comes to a stop, then I look to the side, front and back, but the other car's nowhere to be seen. It's gone just like that. Think about it for a second. I was driving on a parkway and there were no intersections anywhere. On that road, you either go forward or backward if you have a death wish, I suppose. The point is, the high-beam car had no place to take a turn or hide for that matter. When I came to a stop, I should have seen it either speeding away or at a stop near my car. But no, it just disappeared. The rest of the drive was all normal, and I've never experienced anything remotely similar since then. I hesitate to say what I think it was, but please don't tell me that it was only my head. I don't get scared easily, I don't have wild imaginations, nor am I crazy. I've heard of a story way back about a man who died on that road in a car accident while driving intoxicated. I didn't make the connection at first, but ever since that story came back to my mind, I can't stop thinking that I might have seen the ghost of that drunk driver. I really don't know, but I just had to share this story to someone because it's been boggling my mind for so long. Whatever it was, I just hope I never see it again. But better than that, I should really move as soon as I can. I'm going to do my best to give you all the details of this story, but you have to understand, the story which I'm about to tell you had happened some 30 years ago, and some memories have been lost in time. I was 14 years old when this experience took place, and my family and I lived in a small town in one of the south central states. This one night, my friends and I were hanging out by the lake, talking about this new girl in school. Mikey and Tom were completely infatuated with her, and supposedly both of them were going to ask her out. So yeah, we were just laughing, arguing, and generally having a good time. I remember telling Mikey that my money was on Tom, and Tom of course agreed. But strangely enough, Mikey didn't protest my statement, and his attention seemed to be elsewhere. He was looking at the sky and wouldn't say anything. A few seconds later, Mikey breaks his silence as he says, "Guys, I think I just saw a plane crash." Both Tom and I went, "Where? Where?" "Right over the marsh. I saw a fireball in the sky, then a flash of light, and then I think it landed in the marsh." Mikey answered. I told the guys, "Let's go check it out." But then Mikey goes, "Nah, my dad's gonna get pissed if I'm home late again tonight." Mikey left us a minute later, and the excitement kind of fizzled after that. Tom and I went home disappointed, but we soon forgot about the night. I think we sort of figured that Mikey was BSing about the plane crash, because not one of us brought it up after that. A week later, I saw Mr. Clark, who lives 2 houses down from my place, get rushed to the hospital in an ambulance. Apparently, Mr. Clark had developed a fever the previous night. Mrs. Clark woke up in the morning and she found him completely unresponsive to stimuli. That afternoon, Mom wanted to go check on Mrs. Clark, but Dad got really angry and told Mom to stay away from the Clarks for the time being. In fact, he set me, my sister, and brother on the couch, then told us that we are not to go near the Clarks. He made that very clear. I know it sounds really cold, but my dad was just looking out for us. And thank God for that too, because the next day, we saw Mrs. Clark get taken on an ambulance as well. Her daughter Lena was taken in the same ambulance. She could still walk and talk, but you could tell something wasn't right with her. On the very next day after that, everyone in town began to get sick. I heard the nurses came down with the same thing first, and Dr. Langdon was the only medical professional left in town. He must have called the Centers for Disease Control before he succumbed to the illness, because we had choppers landing and army trucks riding into town on the same day. The army guys were wearing masks that covered their entire cranium. On the other hand, doctors and scientist-looking people were wearing full hazmat suit-looking things. They had the town surrounded in no time, and the main road which connected the town to the outside world was blocked off as well. They told us to go home and stay inside. They said they would check for the ill in each house from next morning. We were not to go outside under any circumstances. We had 4 individuals come to our house the next day. From what I could see, it was a group comprised of 1 doctor and 3 soldiers. It was easy to tell since the soldiers were wearing army uniform and they were carrying military spec rifles. The doctor asked us several questions, took our blood sample, and left us after about 20 minutes. They sprayed something on the door as they were leaving, but I didn't know what they wrote at the time because we weren't allowed to go outside. That day, we looked out from the window pretty much all day. We saw some of our neighbors get taken in some army truck, and some were locked in inside their homes just like us. That night, we heard the sound of a truck coming down on the street. It stopped in front of the still-occupied houses. Then a soldier got out from the back and dropped off something on the porch. When it was our turn, we heard a knock on the door. By the time we opened the door, the soldier had already jumped back on the truck. There was a package right in front of the door, and the note was slapped on top of it. It read, "Water and MRE. Take it inside and stay inside." We did as it was instructed on the note. I remember getting really excited about trying army rations. And you know what? They actually tasted pretty good. About a week went by like that, and I could tell that on our street, there were only 3 homes still occupied with living, breathing human beings. It was getting really scary, and we were beginning to wonder if the army was just waiting for us to die. I'm sure you're curious about the landline, and yeah, they were disconnected. The army disconnected it on the same day they had arrived. By that point, we hadn't had contact with the outside world for an entire week. I don't know how they did it, but we weren't getting any radio or TV reception either. I mean, sometimes we could pick up heavily distorted sounds and images, but that was the extent of it, really. Then, in the morning of day 9, a black sedan pulled into our driveway, and out came 3 individuals from the car. They knocked on the door, came inside the house, then asked our parents to send the children upstairs. So we were sent up right away and didn't get to hear what the conversation was all about. An hour later, Mom came upstairs with a backpack and told us to pack the things that were most important to us. She said she would take care of our clothes and other essentials. She made it clear that our stuff had to fit in the backpack and to be selective with what we take because we were never coming home again. Mom had tears in her eyes. She apologized to us, but stressed that we didn't have much time. We left home that day, and just like she said, we never went back there again. The lady who handled our case had us stay in a hotel for a few days, then they took us to some type of government installation. We were given new identities there, and as well as a complete set of made-up life stories to tell our future friends and neighbors. Our whole family were trained and tested to essentially wear our new identities like second skin. It took us about 3 months to fully become new people, in a manner of speaking. Like say, if someone asks my name, I would naturally answer them with my new name and not my original one. I wouldn't need the split of a second to think of telling a lie. No, at that point, I became the new me. So then by that time, we were ready to live a new life, and a new life was given to us. They gave us a house in a good neighborhood, 2 used cars in decent shape, and even a family dog to accompany us. Dad worked in a company assigned by the handler lady. Mom stayed home as she did before the whole thing went down. And you know what? Surprisingly enough, life went back to normal after that. It was only when I got older that I became really interested in finding out exactly what had happened to our old town. What's really surprising is the fact that there were hardly any mention of the event in the news. 1,000 people had vanished in less than 2 weeks, but they were somehow able to contain the whole thing so quietly. Before my dad passed away, I asked him if he can honestly tell me what had truly happened to us on that fateful day. He first told me to never repeat the names of the people he would mention and also the corporation that was involved in the matter. He sat me down and spoke to me for 2 hours, but here I'll give you a condensed version of it. A plane crash did happen on the night Mikey had mentioned about seeing a fireball in the sky. A plane had crashed in the marsh a few miles from our place, and it was carrying some type of experimental chemical. Mr. Clark, along with few other individuals, worked in a factory near the marsh. They were the first one to come in contact with the chemical and therefore the first one to get sick from it. Out of the 1,000 inhabitants in our town, apparently less than 100 had survived the event. The survivors were given a choice to either sign a non-disclosure agreement for full financial support going forward, or we could choose to speak about it and go through lawsuits after lawsuits against the giant corporation. My parents chose to cooperate. They had me, my sister, and brother to look after. The alternative wouldn't have given us much of a future. We don't know what happened to the rest of the survivors. We were split up when we left town, given new identities, then put in a new town hundreds of miles away from our old one. I have no clue what happened to Mikey and Tom. I don't even know if they are alive. I'm guessing some folks might have refused to sign the non-disclosure pact. But since I haven't found a single shred of evidence of anyone speaking up about that day, I leave it up to your imagination as to what might have happened to them. In the present day, my mom still lives and my siblings are doing well as well. As for me, I've got my own family, a lovely wife and 2 beautiful daughters. But sadly, they don't even know my real name and they never will. My dad worked for 22 years before he retired. 2 days before he passed away, he made a confession to me and stressed that it was only for my ears. He told me that the company responsible for killing all our friends and neighbors was the company that he had worked for those 22 years after taking on the new identity. He said that the guilt of staying mum ate him up from the inside throughout the years. He asked for my forgiveness for telling me the truth. He begged me to not tell anyone about it. He said that the weight of the secret would crush them as well. I think he became weak as he got older. He knew he was close to dying and he wanted to tell someone about his sins, but there was no one to tell it to. I was the oldest and he depended on me the most throughout his life. So he shed the weight onto me before he passed away, and I was left to deal with the truth as best as I could. I'm prepared to sin as my father had before me. But the difference is, I'm going to take this to my grave, and I will not pass it down to my daughters. I mention no names or the corporation involved in this event. I try to be as vague as I could with the details so there couldn't be any conjecture. Look at it this way. My father had me to shed the weight of his conscience, and I'm using you to at least talk about it once before I die. I've long moved on, and because I've now got a future through my children, I often feel thankful of the life I live. However, there are days when I wake up to a brutally honest morning and feel tormented at the thought of how messed up this world is in reality. I don't know, man. I've lived a lie for so long. The line between truth and falsehood had been blurred long ago. In the grand scheme of things, I don't think what I do really matters. I'm just going to continue living my simple life and keep my mouth shut till the last breath I take. First off, to tell you this story, I have to describe to you the sort of town I live in. It's not a big town by any measure, but it's always busy with lots of people around. The biggest reason for that is the college nearby, but there's also the fact that most of the residential buildings are apartments and there are only a handful of single detached dwellings. So I was coming home from work this one night. It was around 7 p.m. and I had just gotten off the bus. My apartment's 3 blocks away from the bus stop and the walk home had always been pleasant. By that, I mean that the town is safe and there are always lots of people around, which makes you feel even safer. On the night in question, I was walking toward home like any other day, but I was going to drop by the sushi place to order a takeout. I walked about a block from the bus station and was right in front of the sushi restaurant. I was about to reach for the door when a really loud bass sound filled the entire town and the lights went out a second or two thereafter. It was completely dark, and I also think that the ground shook a little, like a mini quake. Anyhow, you could hear people panicking all around you, but you really couldn't see anything. I took out the phone from my handbag, but the press on the fingerprint scanner refused to work. So I tried rebooting the phone, but nothing. It seemed like no one could turn on their phone because I didn't see a single screen coming on. Before that night, I had no idea how dark the night really is. Working and living in a city, I always figured the moon was quite bright on its own. But as it turns out, most of the lights we see in our apartments come from the artificial ambient lights and not the moon, so it goes without saying the streets were pitch black. I spoke to a few strangers on the street. I think we all tried to comfort each other, and sure enough, it felt a lot better than standing around alone in the dark on my own. After about 10 minutes, our eyes adjusted to the darkness and we could all see much better. There were some businesses that had candles lit, and that seemed to put people much more at ease. I said bye to the strangers I was talking to and walked home after that. The rest of the night was as mundane as any other power outage I had experienced. I went to bed a little early, then woke up in the morning without any problem. On the same day, but in the afternoon, I took my phone to a tiny computer repair shop down the street from my place of work. I remembered seeing a sign that read, "We repair phones," and so I figured it was as good a place as any to get my phone working again. I went inside the shop and the gentleman there told me to come back after work. I clocked out at 6 and went straight to the repair shop. There, the gentleman told me that my phone had been completely fried. Yeah, those are the exact words he spoke. Your phone had been fried. He told me that the inner components of the phone looked as though they were cooked inside a microwave. He asked me what exactly I had done to the phone, and so I told him of the events from the previous night. After hearing my story, he said, "There you go, it was the aliens. You're gonna have to get your money back from them because it'll cost you more money to repair that thing than buying a new one." The joke was kinda cringy, and so I put on a fake smile, paid him $10, then left the store. When I went home that night, most of the town was still in the dark. I got off the bus, then spoke to a few people who were standing in front of a coffee shop. As it turns out, they were already talking about their phones and how they were all fried. It looked as though everyone in town had the same story to tell. We made jokes about it and we laughed like it wasn't a big deal, but I could tell we were all still shaken from the experience. In any event, it took nearly 2 weeks for the entire town to get the power back on. During those 2 weeks, you could see a bunch of trucks from the electric company all around town. Whatever the damage was, quite simply, it was a lot. When the power came back on in my apartment, I also learned that my laptop, tablet, and TV had suffered the same fate as my phone. The only electronics that were still in working condition were simple machines like the toaster I had inherited from my mom and the light fixtures I had purchased from Amazon. I know this isn't the typical scary story you might receive from your viewers, but for me, it was the scariest thing I had ever experienced. What scares me is the mystery behind the event, the loud bass sound which kickstarted the whole thing, the electronics getting fried, not getting any answers from the authorities, and finally there being something out there that can take us back to the Stone Age in an instant. That to me is the most terrifying thing of all. Right from the get-go, I gotta let you know, I actually have no idea what I'm talking about here. Allow me to elaborate. I think we all have those experiences where we know what we saw or heard, but we can't explain exactly what it is, if that makes any sense to you. What I saw in a business meeting 2 weeks ago was so weird and unusual that I have no similar prior experiences to make comparison to it. With that explained, here's what happened on that day. I work as a freelancer and I do data analysis for medium and large corporations. I'm constantly in business meetings throughout the week, and 2 weeks ago was no different. On that day, I had a meeting set up in the afternoon with a company that is heavily involved in government contracts. I was very happy about the meeting because there was some good money to be made in that potential partnership. I arrived in their headquarters, checked in at the lobby, and one thing that I noticed is how immaculate the facility was. I think it'd be an injustice to say that the place was clean. I believe it's only fair to say that the place was perfect. In fact, so perfect that it felt a bit unnerving. I would have probably needed a magnifying glass to find a single speck of dust. And the people? Wow, just wow. How do you train people like that? They all walked like models, dressed up so professionally, and they all had that magazine cover smiles on their faces. It felt as though I had just walked into the Twilight Zone. So yeah, I was escorted into an office by a woman who by anyone's beauty standards should be modeling professionally. I sat in that perfect conference hall waiting for the director of operation to arrive, and he promptly did with 2 other individuals. We sat there discussing the details of the contract that we're offering. The meeting was going well, and I thought I closed the deal on the same day. We were about to discuss the final terms of their proposal when, for no apparent reason, all 3 of them stopped talking. Actually, I have to be more specific. All 3 of them, in the middle of a conversation, ceased all movements. It was as though they turned into a statue or like a robot that stopped functioning. I went, gentlemen? Hello? Is everything okay? Did I say something? Excuse me. But I got nothing from them. There was no reaction at all. It took no less than a minute for them to continue talking, and I'm saying they picked up the conversation from where they left off, as if there was nothing strange about them freezing up and not saying anything for over a minute. How crazy is that? What made it even more insane is how all 3 of them woke up at the same time. And I use the word wake because that's exactly how they looked. It was as if I was talking to 3 robots when suddenly they went into sleep mode. Then they woke up again without any warning. I was thinking of all kinds of things at the time, and the contract was the last thing on my mind. Look at it this way, I just really wanted to get out of there. What I did was to act as naturally as I could. I then made some demands that I knew they couldn't oblige. That, in turn, assured that the contract would go to someone else. The meeting ended, I got my ass out of there, and I don't intend to meet those people ever again. So yeah, that happened, and I don't know what it was. It's strange and crazy, but that's all I can say about the whole thing. I don't mind that at all if you don't publish my story. But I wanted to ask, have you ever heard of something like this? And if you have, do you think you can explain to me what it is exactly that I experienced on that day? First and foremost, I have to tell you that I'm not a teenager who fantasizes about urban legends and superstitions. I'm 27 years old today, and that gullible phase of my life has come and gone some time ago. Some of my friends, however, they haven't changed much. They still keep up quite well with current fads and trends. They know everything that teenagers today are interested in, and they can't seem to get off Facebook and Instagram. One of those friends is Abigail. We've been friends since high school, and we kept in touch throughout college and even after graduation. I appreciate Abigail as a person. She's nice and fun to be around, but she's never grown out of high school. Whenever we get together, it always seems like she wants us to go back to the days when we were both teenagers. She's fun but reckless. She's easygoing but irresponsible. I think you get the gist of the person I'm trying to describe here. Well, that's Abigail in a nutshell. A few weeks ago, I get an email from Abigail. It contains a YouTube video and a short message from her. The message says, "I'm gonna miss you. I wish we could go together." I didn't quite understand what she was trying to say at first, but the message made sense after watching the embedded video. You see, the video was about this thing called the elevator game. To describe it briefly, It's about a way of manipulating the elevator to take you to a different world, an alternate universe, and some say that it may even take you to hell. Basically what Abigail was trying to say is, I'm going through with the elevator game and I won't be in the same plane of existence with you when I'm done with it. As you might imagine, I didn't take it seriously. Once again, Abigail was a girl, or rather a woman, whose mindset was still stuck in high school. It made perfect sense that she would send me a video like that, along with a message that's cringy as hell. But I'll be honest with you, the video was quite interesting. Faker than Hollywood, but just as entertaining as the B-class horror films Hollywood produces. I showed the video to my boyfriend before we went to bed, and he told me that we should try it one of these days. It's not that he believed it, but he wanted to make a video out of it and post it on his YouTube channel. He's got a vlog channel with 800 subscribers in all of his 5 years of YouTuber experience, but he still hasn't given up on becoming the next Casey Neistat. Anyway, I told him no, and that was the end of it. At least that's what I thought at the time. Because the next day, when I got in the elevator to go to work, it occurred to me that we could actually play the game in our own apartment. The thing is, the game requires a building to have at least 10 floors. Well, my building's 27 stories tall. It's also a requirement that the elevator is ridden alone. Well, we got that covered as well. From around 2 AM to 6 AM, no one rides the elevator. By some random choices we've made in the past, we just happen to live in an apartment that's perfect to play the elevator game. I was interested, and playing the game was tempting to say the least. On the same day, when I came back home, I didn't have the guts to pull the trigger. I woke up at 3 AM to go to the bathroom, and it occurred to me that I could play the game. But to my surprise, I chickened out. I thought I was mature enough to not put so much credence to something so improbable, but apparently I was wrong. It took me a whole week to muster up the courage to go ahead with the experiment, but I was fully ready by then. I had convinced myself enough that the game was fictitious and I was ready to take the plunge. I set the alarm on my cell phone to go off at 2:30 in the morning. I set it to vibrate so I wouldn't wake up my boyfriend. I feel the phone vibrating and wake up on time. I then review the rules of the elevator game and head toward the hallway. Once outside, I take the staircase instead of the elevator to get to the first floor. The reason for that is to follow the steps of the game precisely, as it requires that I get on the elevator from the first floor and on my own. When I get to the ground floor, I see James, our doorman, nodding off in his chair. I gently close the door to the staircase so I don't wake him up, then walk toward the elevator. I push the button to call the carriage, and it takes less than a minute for the door in front of me to open with a ding. I look behind me and James is still sleeping soundly. I step inside the elevator and thus completing step number 1. Step number 2, I press the button for the 4th floor. Step number 3, the elevator reaches the 4th floor, but I stay put inside the carriage and press the button for the 2nd floor. Step number 4, the elevator reaches the 2nd floor, and once again I stay put, but this time press the button for the 6th floor. Step number 5, the elevator reaches the 6th floor. I still stay inside the carriage and press the button for the 2nd floor. Step number 6, now this is where things get tricky. Just like the previous 4 steps, I have to stay put inside the carriage, and I also have to press the button for the 10th floor. The issue here is that there's a chance that a voice might speak to you. It'll ask you questions and likely freak you out. But it is imperative that you do not react to it, and surely you cannot answer any of his questions. You just simply ignore it. Step number 7, I do as instructed and stay inside the carriage while pressing on the button for the 10th floor. The elevator goes up and it reaches the 10th floor. Thankfully, there were no voices to speak of. I was emboldened by this and thus ready to finish the game by completing the last 4 steps. I proceed to press the button for the 5th floor. I was left with steps 8, 9, 10, and 11. Allow me to explain to you what those steps are before I proceed telling you the rest of the events of my own. The last 4 steps are as followed. Step number 8. When you reach the 5th floor, a young woman may enter the elevator. Do not look at her, do not speak to her. She is not what she seems. If the walls of the elevator are reflective, then you should try looking down at the floor, meaning you shouldn't even be looking at the reflection of the woman. Step number 9. Press the button for the 1st floor. If the elevator begins ascending to the 10th floor instead of descending to the 1st, you may proceed. If the elevator descends to the 1st floor, exit as soon as the doors open. Do not look back, do not speak. Step number 10. If you reach the 10th floor, you may either choose to get off the elevator or choose to stay on it. If you choose to get off and if the woman entered the elevator on the 5th floor, she will ask you, "Where are you going?" Do not answer her, do not look at her. Step number 11. You will know whether you have arrived at the other world by one indication and one indication only. The only person present in it is you. So that's how things are supposed to unfold if you follow the steps correctly. And now allow me to continue telling you of my own experience from where we left off at step number 8. Step number 8. The elevator goes down and it stops on the 5th floor. The door opens and there's a man standing outside. I didn't mean to look at him. Actually, it's more like I didn't expect anyone to be there. I mean, I knew based on the rule that it could happen, but I didn't think it would actually happen in real life. So when the door opened, I was caught by surprise and actually made eye contact with the man. I broke eye contact right away, but not before seeing a grin on the face of the stranger. So I'm still in the elevator and I keep repeating this in my head. Don't worry, it's all fake anyways, nothing will happen. Obviously, I don't really believe in what I'm saying because if I did, I would surely dare myself to look at the man again, but I can't even keep my chin up and I cowardly stare at the floor. Step number 9. I pretend not to have seen the man and press the button for the 1st floor. That's when the stranger starts talking. Your friend Abigail's waiting for you. Get off with me on the 10th floor and I'll take you to her. Things just got real in a split of a second, and all I could do now is to wait and see if the elevator would stop on the 1st floor or the 10th. Step number 10. The elevator somehow reaches the 10th floor, even though I had pressed the button for the 1st floor. The door opens and I look outside to decide if I should get off. It's hard to describe what I'm seeing in words, but let's just say that something seems off about the air outside. Step number 11. I decide to not get off and thus proceed to press the button for the 1st floor. My rationale behind the decision is simple. I had already messed up the sequence by looking at the man on the 5th floor, and therefore the odds of this ending well for me seemed rather low. The problem, however, is that the fact that the door refuses to close. I keep pressing the buttons for the 1st floor and the one to close the door. I continue pressing both buttons back and forth, and that's when the man speaks again. It's your last chance to see Abigail. Get off with me and I'll take you to her. I continue ignoring the man, and after what seems like an eternity, the door finally closes and the elevator begins to descend. The man speaks again, but this time with urgency in his voice as he says, "You're making a mistake. Let me help you get back to the 10th floor. It's not too late. With my help, you can make this right." Seconds pass by and the door opens on the 1st floor. I look up just enough to make sure that I see James nodding off in the lobby. He's there, and from what I could tell, things look to be normal. I get off the elevator and the man speaks one last time before the door closes. "One way or another, I'll be taking you to the 10th floor." I went straight to my apartment, woke up my boyfriend, and told him everything that had just happened to me. He didn't believe a word I said. So then I told him to F off and proceeded to call Abigail on her cell phone. She wouldn't answer it. I know that I'm calling her at 3 in the morning, but I know she would answer it if she knew I was calling. I tried 5 more times before calling it quits. Morning came and my eyes were still wide open. I couldn't sleep at all, and it's not like I didn't try. I called Abigail again, but she still wouldn't answer. I then contacted her mom, and a couple of days thereafter, Abigail's sister called me to tell me that Abigail was missing. As ridiculous as it may have sounded to her, I still told her about the elevator game. She got angry at first, but then her tone changed once I forwarded the email Abigail had sent me on the night she presumably had disappeared. My reason for showing her the email wasn't to tell her that Abigail had gone to a different dimension, but rather I only meant to provide her with some clues as to what Abigail was up to before she disappeared. Abigail's still missing today, and as crude as this may sound, that's not even my biggest concern right now. You see, a week ago while I was going to work, I saw the man again. I saw him standing on the sidewalk during morning rush hour. Everyone around him were busily walking to get to their place of work. But the man, I knew it was him because he just stood in one place and wouldn't stop looking at me. I don't know what happens next. There's no official answer about getting off the elevator after messing up the sequence. Some say that the person you've met in the elevator will take you away. But how would you know that if you are still here in our world? Because think about it. In order to know that it'll take you, you'd have to be stuck elsewhere in a different dimension. So how in the world did you spread the information online in our world? It doesn't make any sense, but then it's not like any of this makes sense. Yesterday, when I was on my way to work, I saw him again, but this time it was different. He appeared, I looked at him, and everyone on the streets had disappeared for about 5 seconds. It was just him and me. There were no cars or people. Even more weird was the fact that I couldn't hear anything. It felt like I was inside an isolation chamber. Things went back to normal after that, but the point is that the environment where the encounter happens is being altered in rather unpleasant ways. I dare not imagine what could happen next. I don't know how to get myself out of this predicament. Two months ago, I moved into a new house with my girlfriend Harper and my dog Buster. Harper and we both love Buster, but I say my dog because I had him since 5 years ago when he was a tiny puppy, and I've been together with Harper for only 2 years, so yeah, he's my dog and not our dog. Buster is a really friendly boxer. I know all owners of mean-looking dogs say that, but this is true about my dog. It's like he knows how far he can push when he plays. He is really gentle with kids and my girlfriend, but it gets quite rough when he plays with me. My 3-year-old nephew had once bit Buster's left ear, and I can tell you from experience that even good dogs can take defensive bites in situations like that. In Buster's case, however, he gently whimpered as if he was worried about startling my nephew. And then he just walked away. I know him, I love him, but the affection and patience he displayed on that day, he even surprised me. I describe my dog in such detail because you knowing him is important to the story in question. Buster didn't like the new place from day one. On the first day of moving in, he refused to enter the house. It took me 2 hours of petting, begging, hugging, and talking to finally have him take the first step into the house. I could tell he wasn't happy about it. But what else could I do? I wasn't about to let him sleep outside. Things got better as the days passed, but Buster was never the same in the new house. In the old one, he would walk around the house all day and would sleep on the floor of our bedroom. So he had free reign of the entire place and he kept himself busy throughout the day. But in the new place, he wouldn't go past the living room, which is the closest room to the main entrance of the house. I would rarely see him wag his tail, and this stopped doing his butt shake, which he does when he's really happy. The only times that he acted like his old self was when I would walk him in the morning and at night after work. So basically he was happy outside of the house and miserable in it. Then one morning, it was about a month after we had moved into the new house, I woke up to find Buster hiding under the coffee table. I could clearly sense that something had spooked him badly and they refused to crawl out from underneath the table. I tried to drag him out of it and he nearly bit my hand. I was really shocked, but it was also good in a way because I had finally realized the extent of psychological trauma the new place had induced on Buster. I opened the door to let Buster know that I was going to walk him. It seemed like that was the only way to coax him out of it. Then as soon as the door was ajar, Buster ran out from underneath the table so fast that he hit his back on it and dragged it a few inches. He blew past the door. I ran after him, screaming out his name, but he just wouldn't stop. I found him at a local park half an hour later. I knew I couldn't take him back home, and so I asked my girlfriend to bring the car over to the park. We drove him straight to my parents, and I called them on the way. I explained the situation to them and asked them to take care of Buster for me until I could find a new place. Once we arrived at my parents', Buster looked a lot more relaxed. My mom tells me that it took about a week for him to feel 100% comfortable in the new setting. But after that 1 week of warming up, he went back to being the friendly, happy-go-lucky Buster I knew for 5 years of his life. There's still 10 months left on our lease, but I'm still actively looking for a new place. I would happily pay the fee that comes with breaking the lease as long as I can have Buster back in my life. But you know, it's more than that. They say cats, dogs, and other animals can sense things that humans can't. It's not that something bad has happened in the new place, but what if Buster sensed something evil about the house and he was warning us about it? We might still be okay today, but with time, who knows how the place will affect us? Seeing Buster change like that in such a short period of time, and in the end, witness him go mental, the experience is already affecting both me and my girlfriend in a very distressing manner. Simply put, we no longer feel comfortable in the new house. I know most other adults will look at our situation and tell us to grow up or grow a pair. But when your dog is part of your family and not merely a pet, what affects them in such negative manner will surely affect you in profound ways. Because you know how they are, what they are made of, and how they react to challenges. So when they crumble under certain conditions or forces, you understand there has to be something more to it than just an overreaction or a display of irrational fear. I think Buster saw or felt something in our house. From my standpoint, this house isn't safe, and the sooner we move out of it, the better it'll be for all of us. Back in 2012, I used to work in a large warehouse. My job there was to do inventory throughout the day, making notes of extra orders we had to make, and filling up empty shelves with products. This was done all by manual labor. We didn't have robots aiding the humans like you would see in an Amazon warehouse. This one day, I was alone in the warehouse for the first time since I began working there. All the salesmen and delivery people had gone out by 10 a.m., and my boss has stepped out for a couple of hours to take his daughter for a hospital appointment. We usually have one extra guy in the warehouse, but Tony had taken a sick leave for the day. I was working in aisle 11 when I could have sworn I heard a woman's voice that sounded metallic. I stopped taking notes for a second and looked around with a puzzled look on my face. Then there was the voice again, but this time it was a bit louder and clearer, although it still sounded metallic. It was a raspy voice, one that you would expect to hear coming out from a tiny old speaker. I continued to hear the voice, and so I followed the source of it. By that, I mean that I walked closer to where the sound seemed to be coming from. By the time I had walked all the way to the restroom, I could make out what the voice was saying. It said, "Sebastian, your sister, your sister." And then the voice stopped. It was as if it knew I had heard and understood it. Like it knew it didn't have to repeat itself again. As you might imagine, I was completely dumbfounded. I really didn't know what to make of the occurrence. On one hand, I thought maybe I had just imagined the whole thing because I was scared of being alone in a large warehouse. But on the other hand, can the mind actually make you believe that you've heard a specific message like that? It just seemed highly unlikely. So I did what most people would do in a situation like that. I called my sister up and told her to be extra careful on that day. She asked why, and I told her that I had a bad dream the previous night. She laughed about it, and I sort of snapped at her, telling her that it wouldn't hurt to be more careful for just one day. I told her that the dream was really horrible. She apologized, said yes, that she'd be careful, and we hung up. Later that day, I got a call from my sister thanking me that I might have saved her life. This is what happened. Her place of work is only 10 blocks away from her apartment. So she walks to work and back home along the same path every day, and there happens to be an active construction zone on the way. They were retrofitting an existing high-rise building, so you could see the scaffolding on the walls of the structure, and sidewalk pedestrians were protected by overhead protection canopy. My sister normally walks under the canopy because her place of work is on the same side of the street. But on that day, because of what I said, she thought maybe she should take a different path. My sister crossed the street when she arrived at the corner of the active construction zone, and she walked on the opposite side of the sidewalk. A few seconds later, she heard a loud crashing sound, which made her jump and scream at the same time. She then looked at the sidewalk across the street and saw a mangled object that was the size of a car. It had obliterated the overhead protection canopy. Had she walked on that side of the sidewalk, and if the timing coincided with her walking speed, she would have been crushed by what fell from the top of the building. We found out sometime thereafter that what fell was part of the rooftop air conditioner system. It was enormous, like my sister said it was. No human being could have survived getting crushed by such huge and heavy object. So you might be asking, what happened afterwards? And the answer to that is somewhat anticlimactic, because I never heard the voice again after that. I tried to recreate the setting and circumstances of the initial event by staying alone in the warehouse after work hours, but the voice never came back. With that said, I can tell you with confidence that the voice was heard. I did hear it clearly say, "Sebastian, your sister, your sister." On top of that, on the very same day that I heard the voice, my sister's nearly crushed by a falling AC unit. Maybe it was a guardian angel, or perhaps our grandma who passed away 5 years ago. Whatever the case may be, I accept it as a miracle, and I thank the voice for keeping my sister safe. I have a story about my old town that you'll find hard to believe, but the things I'm going to reveal to you have happened and they are real. I know words don't mean much without conclusive evidence to back them up, but I'm afraid my assurance is all I've got to offer. For privacy concerns and to prevent my old town from being labeled a loony town, I will not reveal the location of the happening. The year was 1998 and I was 16 years old at the time. I was in high school and still living with my parents in a small town of 4,000 people. One Saturday in July, I was walking home with my best friend Julia after a 4-hour volleyball marathon. It was quite dark by the time we arrived near the water tower, which is about 5 minutes walk from my place and Julia's as well. We lived only a block away from each other. I was tired, but I couldn't wait to get home to take a shower. So I was about to say to Julia that we should run all the way home, but then she stopped in front of the water tower and said, "Give me a minute, I need a breather." I said sure, and we began talking about some random things when both of us felt a gust of wind. I said, "What was that?" "What was what?" responded Julia. "Didn't you feel that?" I asked again, to which Julia answered, "What, the wind?" "Well, the wind's just the wind." I looked at her, and while giving her a disapproving look, I said, "You're such a dummy. Hold your hand up and feel it. Do you feel any wind blowing?" You see, there was hardly any wind on that day, which was another reason why we were so tired. Therefore, a sudden gust of wind was really weird. I scanned the sky in an attempt to find a flock of birds or perhaps a storm brewing, but there was nothing. Then, as I was about to grab Julia's wrist to make her walk, I saw something on the roof of the electronics store across the street. I asked Julia, "Hey, do you see that? What is that?" "I don't know, it kind of looks like a person," Julia answered. Just as soon as she said that, the figure became much larger all of a sudden, and we saw the red glow in its eyes. We didn't know it at first, but the reason why it instantly looked bigger was because it was spreading its wings. Seconds later, it began hovering in mid-air and it seemed to be coming closer to us. That's when I could see the figure in greater detail. It definitely looked humanoid, but its limbs were much thinner than you and I, human beings. On top of that, its shoulder, chest, abdomen, and hips were far more slender than that of the average human being as well. However, its head, it was big, really big. Now, it's important to note that when I say thinner and slender, it's all speaking relatively here. The thing was about 9 feet tall, so yeah, huge. Therefore, what I'm referring to is that the creature was thin and slender in proportion to its entire body. And the wings, by the way, they had to be at least 10 feet wide from end to end. So this enormous human-looking bird comes closer to us, and I remember both me and Julia being frozen in the moment. Because in some corner of my brain, a tiny piece of my mind was screaming run, but for the most part, my mind was engulfed in fear. The creature was about 2 cars length away when Julia and I screamed hysterically due to the sound of a gun going off. We crouched and held on to one another, and we heard 5 or 6 additional gunshots until it stopped. All was quiet, my eyes were closed, and I'm sure Julia's were too. Then my shoulder must have flinched from the sensation of someone tapping on my shoulder. I thought I was going to die, but then the relief washed over me soon after. It was a person who tapped on my shoulder, and he was asking us if we were okay. Julia and I opened our eyes, got up, and realized the creature was gone. The man who came to help us held a shotgun in one hand, and he looked to be in quite a shock as well. He told us to follow him to his store and that he would call the police. We did exactly that. Inside the store, Julia made the call because her brother Benjamin was one of the deputies in town. He arrived soon after the call, and we described what happened to us in full detail. The problem, however, was that Benjamin was a douchebag, to put it kindly. It's understandable that our story might have sounded insane, but there were 3 of us, 3 perfectly sane people, including his sister, who saw the same thing. Unfortunately, it didn't matter. Benjamin spoke respectfully to the gentleman who helped us, but as he was driving us home, he told us that we were wasting his time and that he'd be angry if the situation wasn't so funny. When he dropped me off at home, I saw a sly smirk on his face, and I remember having the urge to slap him around silly. I didn't, of course, and that was the end of the night. The situation changed dramatically the next day. Apparently, something happened to Benjamin overnight. He called my parents and asked for permission to speak to me. When he came over, he first apologized for being a douchebag the previous night and told me that he had seen the same thing. In fact, his experience was a bit more dramatic. He told me that he was driving back to the station after responding to a call when something with substantial weight had crashed or landed on the roof of his cruiser. He panicked, lost control of the car, and ended up ramming a streetlight. After he gathered himself, he got out of the car to assess the damage. Only the damage was the last thing he should have been concerned of. As soon as he got out, he felt a strong gust of wind on his back. When he turned around to look, he saw the same creature that I had described earlier that night. Benjamin pulled out his service weapon, but the creature flew away before he could fire a single round. Now, the reason why Benjamin came over to speak to me was so I could help him. As it turns out, karma got the better of him, because apparently the sheriff did not believe a word he spoke. So he needed me, his sister, and the gentleman who helped us to speak on his behalf, thus giving credence to his story. As much as I hated his guts, it was a problem that needed to be dealt with, and so I helped. It didn't take long for other residents of the town to bear witness of the creature. Everyone spoke about it, and the kids at school went to town with conspiracy theories at every chance they got. Then one day, it was as if a consensus had formed organically, because everyone started calling the creature the Mothman. I didn't even know what the Mothman was at first. This was before the movie The Mothman Prophecies had been made, and thus not many people knew about the original Mothman incident of 1966. But even so, someone must have known about the incident fairly well because the story began to spread like a wildfire. Some kids in school would say that death awaited all of us and that misery would befall the town. It was all fun and games for the young ones, but the adults were quietly worried and fearful of what could possibly be the appearance of the Mothman. When you live in a small town, and if you pay close attention to how people interact with one another, you get to see firsthand how fear truly spreads like a virus. Our town used to be a quiet, quaint town occupied by good folks who care about their neighbors and friends. We lived peacefully alongside the Amish, a small tribe of Native Americans, and even the witches. Yeah, we had witches in our town. They mostly kept to themselves in a large cabin out in the woods, so they would come into town once every couple of months to purchase provisions and whatnot. But all of that tolerance, tranquility, and peacefulness went out the window merely 1 week after the supposed Mothman made our town its home. I saw a man spitting at one of the witches in the supermarket, blaming her for bringing the Mothman into our town. I also witnessed the tension between the town folks and the Amish. It was as if they wanted to find someone to take the blame, and the powerless seemed to be an easy target. Things got worse not long after that. We had more motor vehicle accidents in a span of 2 weeks than we normally do in an entire year. People fought and argued a lot. Whether you were in a post office or in a restaurant, the tension in the air was putting everyone on the edge. People began to blame the Mothman for everything, but I, on the other hand, began to wonder if it wasn't us making things worse than they should be. Then this one night, Dad came home after work and he had this look on his face that I still remember vividly till this day. It was the look of a man overwhelmed by fear. He's a 6'5", 240 pounds former Marine. Men like that never show their fear, and I sure as hell never saw my dad display any sign of vulnerability. He didn't tell us what had scared him so much at the time. He spoke to Mom in private for about 10 minutes and then told us that we weren't going to church the next day. My brothers and I were happy because, like any other kids around that age, we honestly didn't like going to church. Next day came, and around the afternoon, I heard a loud commotion outside. I went outside with Mom and we saw a large plume of smoke rising from the general direction of the church. We were all stunned, but my family even more so because of what Dad told us the previous night. As horrible as it may sound, I actually wondered for a little while if Dad knew something was going to happen or if he was somehow involved. It took nearly 2 hours to put out the fire, and the town has suffered 11 casualties in total. In a small town like ours, tragedies that big hits hard in a very personal way. Everywhere you went, people were in somber mood, and they did their best to rein in the anger that's been building up inside them ever since the Mothman's appearance in town. Things were quiet for about 5 days until a man was crushed by a falling tree and died later at the hospital. I found out the next day that the victim of the accident was the man who helped me and Julia on the night we saw the creature. We were told that it was a freak accident. They said that the man was out in the woods hiking with his dog when supposedly a dead tree fell on him. Basically, he was in the wrong place at the wrong time. Strangely enough, people stopped seeing the Mothman after this final freak accident. No one died, we stopped having motor vehicle accidents for a good while, and people weren't so angry anymore. It all seemed to go back to being normal again, but in reality, it took our town folks about a year to feel comfortable and, more importantly, safe again. And as for the fire in the church, I learned the story behind it much later in life. As it turns out, Dad had seen the creature on the night he came home with a frightened look on his face. He told me that it was standing on the roof of the church and its eyes followed him as he drove past it. Obviously, it felt like an omen, and so he went to speak to the pastor in the morning about the whole thing. Pastor Anderson told him that it was all the more reason why we should pray and come together as a town. He wouldn't entertain the idea of canceling the service on Sunday. Dad tried several times, but he couldn't change the pastor's mind in the end. The service went on as scheduled, but we didn't attend it on that Sunday. My parents still live in the old town, and things for the most part had been dull as they were before the 1998 incident. There was a time when I tried to have them move out to Phoenix, my current place of residence. But they didn't want to, and I understand that when they say that there's no place that's 100% safe. So to wrap up the story, I don't know what I had exactly seen on that fateful night in 1998. Was it the Mothman? Does the Mothman really exist? I can't answer any of those questions. However, I can tell you that my description of the creature is accurate, and the terrible events that followed after its appearance have all happened in real life. I don't know if it was the creature that caused all those terrible things, but in my mind, it's too far-fetched to think that everything was the result of coincidence. In the end though, I'll be a happy camper as long as I never see it again. I really hope that I'm safe here in Phoenix. September of last year, I was driving from Florida to Virginia to spend the weekend with my parents. It's roughly about 12 hours trip, and I've done this drive plenty of times since moving to Florida for a job. In the beginning, I went back home a lot to see my girlfriend, but then we broke up after a while, and so my visits were far in between. In any event, I left home at 9 p.m. to avoid traffic, and I was about halfway to my destination when I could see a figure moving by the side of the road. As I got closer, I noticed that it was a person, a he to be precise, and he was sticking out his thumb to hitch a ride. I thought about it for a second, but then I decided not to pick him up. Don't blame me, it's the influence of the mainstream media. Can you remember one film that ended well, where a character gladly gives a ride to a stranger? Yeah, I thought so. I felt bad at first, but to be honest, I quickly forgot about it and continued driving. I must have driven for another 10 minutes when I saw another guy hitching a ride. He was doing the same thing as the guy before him, sticking out his thumb, and he looked to be smiling as well. I had already passed one guy, and I wasn't about to make it unfair for the guy earlier, so I just looked straight and continued driving. Insanely enough, I see another hitchhiker after another 10 minutes of drive. I was going about 80 miles an hour, but I slowed the car down to about 40 to look at him closely. I couldn't be sure, but it seemed to be the same guy. He was a Caucasian male, had a hat on, and was wearing jeans and checkered shirt. I didn't stop for him, of course. It was getting really creepy out there. The next 10 minutes of drive was the most tense minutes I had ever spent on the road. I could feel my heart beating faster and my arms feeling a bit numb. So I drove for another 10 minutes, then 20, 30, and thankfully, nothing. The hitchhiker didn't show up. I let out a sigh of relief and thought to myself that I crapped my pants for nothing. What a crazy coincidence, I thought, and began to relax a little. Some half an hour later, I merged onto a ramp to stop at a service station. Aside from two other cars, the parking lot was empty. There were a bunch of 18-wheelers at the far end of the parking lot, but the drivers were most likely sleeping in their cabin. I stopped in front of the main building and was about to turn off the ignition, but then I couldn't because of what I was seeing in the rearview mirror. It was the hitchhiker, the same guy who was wearing the hat, jeans, and checkered shirt. He just stood there about 3 cars length behind and looked straight at me. I debated for a second if I should call the cops or maybe go into the main building to ask for help, or perhaps if I should just leave. I went with the last option. I put the gear to reverse, slowly turned the car to point it toward the exit, and by that point, I could see the man from the passenger side window. He wasn't smiling anymore. In fact, he had this strange and empty look on his face. I didn't want to seem like I was in a haste, and so I slowly moved the gear lever to drive and then gently pressed on the accelerator. I may have moved 10-20 yards max when I checked him out again in the rearview mirror, and he was gone. I slammed on the brakes and the car came to a stop. I exited the car, looked around the parking lot, but the hitchhiker was gone. To where though? How does he just disappear in just a few seconds in this enormous parking lot? If he ran into the main building, then I would have seen him run inside. And even if he opted to run toward the road, I would still have seen him. There was quite a distance to cover from where he was standing to either the road or the main building. But dang it, he had vanished into thin air. Thankfully, he stopped showing up for the rest of the drive. I told this story to my mom and dad, but they told me that I should stop driving at such late hours because people see things when they get scared. It was just a nice way of saying that I chickened out and had imagined everything. What about you, Dennis? What do you think happened to me on that night? I know you've stopped doing the outros, but I would love to get your take on it. Thanks for reading, buddy. Take care. My husband Liam and I, we got married 3 years ago and we bought a house not long after that. It's a 2-story house in a nice neighborhood. We got the usual cookie-cutter layout of small front yard and larger backyard. It's got cathedral ceiling, double garage, finished basement, and all that jazz young couples seek nowadays. Oh, by the way, this is beside the story, but don't buy houses with cathedral ceilings. They waste energy, space, and you don't even notice the look after a year. But going back to the story, we had our first child in that house, and we've made lots of wonderful memories during the initial 2 years. The schools for our township had very good reputation, and the plan was to raise our kids in the same house until they get old enough to leave the nest. By the way, I say kids because I'm currently carrying another child in my huge belly. We had always hoped to have 3 kids, and darn it, we are gonna get it done. So this was about 2 years after living in that house, and one day, I went to the basement to empty the tank of the dehumidifier. In one corner of the basement, with a small bar that was already built in when we moved in, and I saw a bug crawling out from behind the shelf that held some whiskeys and vodkas. I ran toward the bar, grabbed a tissue, and tried to kill the bug, but the damn little critter was fast. It crawled back into the tiny crack between the wall and the shelf, and I wasn't going to catch it. I was about to go back to the dehumidifier when I saw a small lever resting against the top shelf. It was weird because it looked out of place. Actually, let me correct that. It was out of place. I played around with that by flicking it, pushing it, and then I pulled it toward me. That's when I could hear a clicking sound, and one side of the shelf pulled out just slightly, like a door because it was a door. I pulled the shelf toward me and it opened just like a door. It was really dark on the other side, and I thought for a second that I should wait for Liam to check it out. But then I got too curious. I began swiping on the walls right next to the door, or the shelf if you prefer. Then bingo, I hit a switch, pushed it up, and the lights came on. I couldn't move for a while as soon as I saw what was in front of me. I had never been so terrified in my life. After what seemed like an eternity, I slammed the door behind me, ran upstairs, grabbed my phone and keys, then left the house in my car right away. I called the cops and my husband in the car, and this is the reason why. The room was some type of torture chamber. In the 2 corners of the room, it had 2 cages just large enough to fit a person. In the middle of the room, there was a rusty bed, one of those metal ones the hospitals use. The thing had straps for the arms, legs, and the head. At the far end of the room, there were various sharp items that looked sinister. I was horrified just looking at them. So when you combine the secretive door, the room, cages, and the sharp tools, you can only come up with one answer as to how they come together to be used. The police tracked down the previous owner, but he was out of the country by then. They couldn't connect any potential victims to the house, and so they think the previous owner never had the chance to use it. But let's be honest here, that's all conjecture really. The truth is, no one really knows what went on in their secret room. That is, aside from the psycho who built it, and possibly the victims. We moved out of the house right away, and now live in a different house and zip code. Unfortunately though, we still own the old house and it's unlikely that it'll ever sell. My husband says that we should be thankful that we found out about it as early as we did and didn't have to raise our children in that horrible place. He is probably right. Most people in this world are good. I have a firm belief in that. However, it's impossible to ignore the tiny percentage of the evil ones who have monopoly on the terrible doings within our society. That house has done something terrible to me. Trusting people is so impossibly hard now, and I've got such a pessimistic view of the world. I wasn't always like this, and I sincerely wish I could go back to being my old self again. Sleep paralysis. Studies on it suggest that about 10% of the world population experience it on a regular basis. You may not notice it, but there are people who you know personally, people who you are close to, who are suffering from it as we speak. Some of those people might have tried to speak to you about it, but you most likely didn't take them seriously or simply told them that everything will be okay. That cliché saying that I've grown sick and tired of, "It'll be okay, I promise." Yeah, right, like your empty promises could make any difference in our true suffering. Sleep paralysis is so prevalent that every city in America has got at least one support group actively helping people. I'm not talking about professionals helping the ill. No, it's more like the AA programs, Alcoholic Anonymous. They've got people with drinking problems who help each other out, and we've got people who've exhausted all avenues for solutions, trying to find comfort and support among similar people. We've all been to the doctors, spoke to the psychologists, and some of the wealthier ones had admitted themselves to sleep centers that study sleeping disorder. But after all that, when we've tried everything, we end up in our support group barely hanging on to our sanity. We don't find answers within the group, but talking to others in the same situation does help with the coping mechanism. The stories that people share with the group are all very similar. Generally speaking, the first thing that we feel after falling asleep is the darkness approaching. I know it doesn't make sense that one can feel something after falling asleep and remember that feeling after waking up, but that's what happens to us. We see and feel things after falling asleep and remember everything when we wake up. Our eyes might be physically shut, but we can see everything that's happening around us. So then the darkness approaches to start the nightmare. We try to move and scream to wake ourselves up, but other than blinking our eyes, we can't do anything. In fact, I don't even know if we are blinking our eyes for real, or if it's all part of the dream. The most awful part of the ordeal is when the being starts to put pressure on the chest. To some, the being looks like an old hag. For others, it could be a dark figure that's hard to classify. For me, and to some others whom I know, the being looks something like a creature that should only exist in hell. If I have to describe it, its skin looks grayish green. Its eyes are round and as big as an apple. The opening of its mouth stretches all the way to its ears. It's short, maybe about 3 foot tall, but it's got a round, thick body and it must weigh a lot. However different the being may look on the outside, what it does is always the same. It gets on top of our chest and presses down on it as hard as it can. While it's doing that, you can't move, talk, or wake up. You feel your body is struggling to take control, but it just can't. No matter what you do, the being has full control of you and you slowly suffocate, starting from the inside. After a while, it feels like you're about to die, and that's when the being lessens the pressure just enough so you don't pass out or die. It repeats the horror throughout the night. So for us, it's no different than being waterboarded for 7 to 8 hours straight. We wake up traumatized with exhaustion you couldn't begin to imagine. Most of us have gone through this for as long as we can recall. My mom tells me that when I was only a toddler, I used to wake up bursting in tears and she couldn't comfort me no matter what she did. I think I had this since I was born. Medicine can't help us, science can't explain our experiences. Sleep centers seem to only make things worse. I've got no hope, I've got no joy in life. Maybe I read and watch horror stuff to feel comforted by the fact that we're not the only ones who suffer. I know it sounds like a terrible motivation to do anything, but when you suffer like we do, you hold on to anything that can help you deal with the agony in any means possible. If I didn't grow up in a religious household, I would have ended this long ago. My only hope and wish is for this miserable life to come to an early end. I'm being completely honest when I tell you this. A deadly accident would be the greatest gift in my life. I've been working for the same company for the last 5 years, and because of that, the events of every Mondays through Fridays have been and are obviously repetitive. The company I work for is a consulting firm. It's a fairly large corporation and we occupy an entire building for our operation. The building's 12 stories tall and it takes up about 1/8 of an average city block. So it's tall and narrow. 2 weeks ago, it was a Monday. I arrived in front of our building really tired and sleepy due to the 6-hour-long gaming session on the previous night. I shook my head, then coughed out loud to psych myself up. The thing is, our company downsized last week, and so the last thing I needed was to look droopy at work. I felt a little better after the ritual, so then I proceeded to enter the lobby through the main entrance. Inside the lobby, I smile, taking a big breath of air, then exhale slowly. It's a routine that I've performed starting from day one of working here. Don't ask me why, but it makes me feel more confident. I then ride the elevator with a group of people and get off on the 3rd floor. The elevator door closes behind me. I turn to my left, but then I stop after taking a couple of steps. It doesn't make any sense because what I see is a long hallway and we don't have one of those in this building. This is a tall and narrow building. Once you get off the elevator, there's supposed to be 3 doors in the hallway to the left, which lead to 3 separate large offices. It should be the same layout to the right side of the elevator, and so I do a 180, but then it's the same deal on the opposite hallway. So it's like this. Either the building got bigger to about 10 times its original size over the weekend, or I'm in the wrong building. One or the other has to be correct, because otherwise I've gone insane. So then I walk to where the elevator button is located and proceed to press it. I wait there for 1 minute, 2 minutes, then 3, and finally 5. But no, the elevator does not arrive. I weigh my options for a minute and quickly come to a realization that I've got 2 choices. I either walk down the hallway to the right or take the left one. I choose left because that's normally where my office is supposed to be located at. As I walk down the hallway, I see doors onto my left and right, but every single one of them are locked. I walk to the end of the hallway and see that it bends around to the left. I make the turn and continue to follow it. This hallway looks a lot different. I see doors onto my left and windows to the right. I get closer to the windows as I walk forward, then look outside to guesstimate my location inside the building in relation to the landmarks outside. But there's a problem with that. I don't recognize anything outside. And that's actually not the only problem because there doesn't seem to be any person outside. This building's located in the middle of a business district. Not only do you find hundreds of people walking about during daytime, but there are a ton of people going about their business at nights as well. So you see, it's impossible not to see anyone outside at this time or any time of the day. I continue walking and get to the end of this particular hallway. It bends again to the left just like last time, and I figure I should continue to follow it. After a while, I'm at the end of the hallway again. I make a left and shortly thereafter arrive at another bend, and surely enough, I turn left again. I'm completely stumped at this point. I've made 4 90-degree turns at 4 ends of the hallway. If this building's normal, then it only makes sense that I should be back at the spot where I started from. but I'm not. The only thing I see ahead of me is more hallway with doors to the left and windows to the right. I feel shortness of breath and at the same time feel the urge to regurgitate everything I had for breakfast. I'm terrified. A few minutes passes and my heart finds its rhythm again. I pull out the cell phone from my pocket, unlock it, only to find that I get no reception here. I reboot the phone and try again, but I still get no signal. This seriously can't be happening. I'm scared, but I try to maintain the calmness and continue walking toward the same direction. After about 10 minutes, I complete another round trip through the hallway, but I still can't find the elevator. I've got no choice but to continue on. I walk, and walk some more. I try to open the doors, but every single one of them are locked. I even try to break the doors by slamming against them with my shoulders, but all I've got to show for it is a bruise that's getting darker by the hour. I don't know how long I must have been walking by now, but it's getting dark outside and I still don't see a single person on the streets. It looks so empty out there that I might as well be looking at a film set rather than a real city. I think for a second if I should smash the window, hang over the ledge, then make a jump to the ground floor. But at 3 floors up, I may not die from the jump, but if I'm unlucky, I might end up paralyzed. Making the jump is out of the question. I walk a little more and after a while, it gets completely dark outside. Mind you, I use the word completely in its literal sense. I see no lights gleaming from the buildings or cars, but more importantly, there's no stars or the moon in the sky. Strangely enough though, the hallways in my building are lit brightly. I sit down to take a break because I'm absolutely spent. I can feel myself nodding off, and so I try to stay awake by slapping my face with the palm of my hand. It works for a while, but not long after, it all goes to black. I fall asleep. It's daytime when I wake up. I look around and I find myself inside a building that I don't recognize. This isn't my company's building, nor the building I ended up getting lost in. It looks to be a warehouse, and I can tell it's been abandoned for decades. Everything looks old, worn off, and the air smells really terrible. To the right, I see what looks like a large sliding door that's half ajar. I walk toward it and hear the familiar sound of the traffic and just feel the general sense that things are alive out there. I walk outside, the sun is shining brightly, and I can recognize where I am. The building's located inside the land of a pier that's been abandoned since the 70s. I've never set foot in here before, but I've drove past this building several times since I moved to the city. I pull out the phone from my pocket and I see full bars of signal. I call a friend of mine and he answers the phone with a scream like he's angry at me. I ask him what's happening and he tells me that I've been gone for a full week. That's right, my family and friends hadn't seen me for an entire week. I spent one night in that building that I don't recognize, yet somehow 1 week had passed here in the outside world. I can't explain it, I don't understand it, and obviously I'm not the only one who feels that way. The police checked the footage of the security camera at work and they were able to confirm that I had entered the building on the day of my disappearance. I was also seen in the elevator on the same day in the morning, but after getting off it, no cameras captured my image afterward. The hallways don't have cameras, but the elevator, the main entrance, and the rear entrance do have them all installed. If I got out of the building, I should have been seen in at least one of those cameras. But the police couldn't find a single frame of my image after getting off the elevator in the morning. The police couldn't explain what had happened to me. The people in charge of security at my work were stumped all the same. The psychologist whom I spoke to just says some useless things. Not that I blame her, seeing as how it's all mystery to me as well. In the end, I had no answers. I don't know how you could enter one building and end up in another. Not to mention, I fell asleep in this strange building, only to wake up in a warehouse 3 miles away. Everyone could have called me crazy if not for the footage from the security camera. So they can't, because the footage clearly shows that I went inside the building but never got out. I'm not crazy, but what happened to me surely is. And that's all I've got to say about the happening. I know it sounds impossible and it's hard to believe. I surely didn't believe stories like mine when I heard them on YouTube or read them on Reddit. But it happened to me for real, and for that, I know that I'll never look at the world in the same way again. I'm an electrician by trade, and I work for a large construction company. Last year, my company took on a contract to build a huge retreat in a remote mountain. I wish I could tell you the location, but I can't because I'm bound by contract to keep my mouth shut of the specifics. In any event, I joined the crew about 9 months after the construction began. It took that long because just laying the foundation, they say it was a complex and difficult job. You add framing and roofing on top of that, that's how it took 9 months for the plumbing, electrical, and HVAC work to get started. I was floored the first time I got to witness the construction with my own eyes. It was the first time I was involved in such a grand-scale construction, but that wasn't the only reason why I was so impressed. It was actually the location of the construction that surprised me the most. It was in the middle of nowhere. The location was so remote that they had to build a private road to get all the materials and equipment delivered to the site. As for the size of the building, it was only 3 stories high but tremendously wide. Imagine a mansion about the size of half a football field. That should give you a good idea of its dimensions. I worked at the site for about 5 months and my job there was finished. They called me up a couple of times thereafter to change a few things, but my job there was pretty much done. During the 5 months that I worked there, many of the guys who had been there from the beginning kept telling me that the building was actually a bunker for a super rich businessman. I figured they were just messing with the new guy, and so I didn't take them seriously. But all of that changed about 14 months after I left the site for good. I came to work one day and my manager called me up to tell me that the CEO wanted to have a chat with me. I asked him why the head honcho of the company would want to speak to a lowly electrician, and all I got in return was a shrug. That day, I left our crummy office in downtown and drove to the headquarters of the company for the first time since I took the job. I felt out of place with all the suits around me, but whatever, I was gonna be there for only a day. I got upstairs, waited for the CEO, and some minutes later I was taken into a large, luxurious office by the secretary. The CEO dude was far from the man I expected him to be. He was polite and respectful. He didn't look down on me, nor did he try to boss me around. However, he was charismatic and persuasive. This was the first time I had met someone in such high place. I used to think of them as pompous, rich, know-it-all fools, but I was wrong, and I'm man enough to admit when I'm wrong. This guy was just on another level in terms of intelligence, poise, and confidence. It's self-evident why this guy runs the show. At any rate, the CEO laid out a contract and informed me that a confidentiality agreement was part of the deal. He needed me to sign that even before agreeing to the work he was proposing. It was tempting because the money was good. No, the money was great. I was getting paid 5 times what I make in a year for a 6-month job. Now granted, I had to stay on site until the end of the project and we had to work long hours. Food and lodging was included. I was promised a 1-month paid leave after the project. It was an offer I couldn't refuse. It didn't take me long to think about it. I signed at the dotted line and the contract had been sealed. So the contract, as it turns out, it was for the big retreat in the mountain. Yeah, I know, the construction should have been finished by then, and it was, but it was only the surface structure that was finished. What me and a dozen other carefully selected workers had to do was to finish the basement. The huge basement. You probably get it by now. It was actually a bunker that we were finishing. An actual end-of-the-world bunker. The surface structure, it was all for show. I'm sure the owners would come by and have their picnic and whatnot, but it still doesn't change the fact that it was built to hide what's underneath. You know, make it inconspicuous. And regarding the underground complex, I can't give you much detail on it, but what I can tell you is that it ain't a normal basement. It's deep, really deep. It's reinforced with thick concrete, and the mountain itself is supposed to provide added layer of protection. Everything electrical is shielded, there are backups to everything and backups to backups. It's basically a fail-safe complex. The large sum of money all the workers were offered was hush money. I don't think they expect the place to be kept a perfect secret, but I suppose they want to limit exposure as much as they can. The bunker was also built a few states away from our company. I mean, our company has a presence in that state as well, but all the workers were brought from out of state, way out of state. I'm sure the reason behind that was to make sure none of us could drive up there in case of a real end of the world scenario. It's not like we have choppers on standby in case of an incoming asteroid. I think what they did was practical and smart. We finished the bunker in time and were given everything that we were promised. I enjoyed that 1-month leave that was promised, but I kept thinking about the bunker the whole time I was relishing the long vacation. I couldn't stop asking myself, why now? Is something coming? Are they expecting something bad to happen? I mean, you have to figure these people have connections in high places. When they spend tens of millions of dollars on a mega project like that, they must have a good reason behind it. It's not like it matters since I don't have a spot waiting for me in a complex like the one we built. But the mind does what it wants and I can't stop thinking about it. I know, I'm probably making something out of nothing. If I were a billionaire, I would do the same thing. I don't have to think that the world is coming to an end. I would just build one for what if. I've got money to burn, so why not? Looking back, it was an interesting experience to say the least, and so I thought I'd share with you. Let's just hope that the bunker will never get to be used. Today's date is October 21st, 2017 as of writing this email. I live in a small town in Alabama, and we've been experiencing the loud booms that should be well known to everyone by now. We've been hearing this strange sound since last year, and so it goes back to 2016. I can't recall the exact date of the initial boom, but I know that it's been well over a year, and I can still remember how it happened. I was in my kitchen and the time was around 2 in the morning. I had a long nap in the afternoon and I just couldn't go to sleep. I was reading a book to pass the time, but then I figured I should have a glass of wine to help me fall asleep. I got up and as I was walking toward the kitchen counter, a loud boom sounded off and the floor shook a little. Yeah, it wasn't just a sound. There was an actual tremor of sorts. I was taken aback and didn't know what to do. I think I panicked a little because I actually thought that it was an earthquake. From what I know, we had a 7.3 magnitude earthquake in the late 1800s. However, the ones that followed the big one were barely detected by geological instruments. But don't take my word for it. I'm only 29 and the older folks might tell you a different story. So I go to school the next day and everyone were talking about the boom. Oh, by the way, I'm a high school teacher, and that's why I get to talk to so many people Monday through Friday. But yeah, my students were joking about the incident, they spoke about aliens, mega earthquakes and such. The teachers, on the other hand, were predictably more low-key with their opinions. In any event, the news on that day reported that we didn't have an earthquake in our area. I was listening to the radio while driving home after school, and they said that no one knew what the boom was or where it originated from. A few days later, everyone had moved on to a more exciting topic for conversation, and we just forgot about it. But not for long though, because the boom came back about a week thereafter. It was just as loud, and it still shook the ground a little. For God's sake, some days it was so loud that you can see the peanut butter jar sliding on the table. Granted, it wasn't a full-on slide. The fact is that the sound was powerful enough to slightly move a full jar of peanut butter. I actually began to worry that my house might take damage from it. Not from the intensity, but from the frequency of the boom. I say that because not long after, we began hearing the boom almost every day. I do wonder nowadays if I should have someone inspect the house for damages just in case. That's how things have been for the past year and some months. They made inquiries to university geology departments, and I hear some have even called the USGS the United States Geology Survey. Safe to say we haven't gotten any answers. It's exactly like you see on the news. They talk about it, use it as a 2-minute filler story, but no one has answers for it. I personally have never been into conspiracy theories, and I'm not saying that in a disparaging manner. I'm into something that's arguably considered to be more out there, like the ghost and creature in the woods stories. But the booms that we've been hearing in our town for the past year or so, it's turning me more and more into a conspiracy nut. There have been talks about mega earthquakes, super volcano eruptions that could end the world, and some of the more hardcore people have been talking about an alien invasion. I still have reservation about the alien theory. I haven't gone that mad yet. Even so, I do wonder if the government is hiding something from us. Because otherwise, I think we would have gotten some answers to our tiny problem of the boom. The year was 1992 and the location was somewhere remote in Utah. I was driving with 3 of my closest friends to our destination, where we would spend the next 3 days camping. We were all in our mid-20s at the time, and camping was our way of maintaining our friendship. We all grew up in the same town, but after high school, each of us went to different colleges. Then after finishing college, we all wound up in different states due to our jobs. We used to talk about living together after college, but as we all know, life doesn't always go according to plan. Therefore, getting together twice a year, once during summer and once in the winter, was the next best thing for us. It was snowing quite heavily by the time we arrived at the parking lot of the campground. When we checked the weather last night, we were supposed to get only 3 inches of snow today. The weather forecast was way off. At the rate that it was snowing, I expected us to get at least 10 inches. Still, it wasn't a big deal. We were all experienced outdoorsmen, and camping in a winter storm is actually a lot of fun. We set up camp about a mile away from the main campground. The plan was to go about 3 miles into the woods, but with about 4 inches of snow on the ground, we would have made too slow of a progress. We set up 2 tents, and that alone took 2 hours. Between the clearing of the snow and building a shallow wall to protect us from the strongest of wind, it was a lot of work just getting settled in for the day. By 3 in the afternoon, the storm cleared and we were free of all responsibilities for the day. It was going to get dark soon, but we all wanted to go for a hike. The 4 of us agreed that we should go for a short walk, and we left our campsite right away. Having lived in Georgia for the past 4 years, the feeling of walking on fresh snow was just something else. It brought back lots of fond memories of our hometown back in Minnesota. We were having a real great time. On the way back to the campsite, the snowstorm had picked up again. We had maybe another half an hour walk to get to our camp, but due to the heavy snowfall, we knew the trip would take us at least an hour. We were walking in a single file, and I was up front breaking the wind. I was going to stop and tie everyone with a rope, so we wouldn't get separated no matter what. I stopped the guys, took out a brand new paracord, then we tied it around our waist, 1 person at a time. Paracords aren't as strong as climbing lines, but it was all we had and definitely better than nothing. We continued walking and the storm got worse by the minute. I could feel the line dragging from one direction to another, meaning we would have gotten separated if not for the paracord tied around our waist. We had walked for another 20 minutes when I stopped to check on the guys. As soon as I turned around, I felt the paracord instantly tightening around my waist. I lost my balance and fell because I was getting dragged on the ground. Not long after, my body was plowing too much snow and the paracord couldn't hold the weight. I felt the snap, came to a stop, and got up as quickly as I could. I tried calling for the guys, but the storm was so powerful that I could barely hear myself shouting. I lost my bearings by this point, and all I could do was to walk in random direction to try to find the guys. Minutes later, I found Brandon, who was walking right behind me before getting separated. He was panicking as he tried to say something. He soon realized that I could barely hear him, and so he grabbed my head, put his mouth right above my left ear, then began speaking. He said something grabbed Ryan and ran toward the direction we came from. I responded, "Let's try to find our bearings first, then go look for Ryan and Christian. Walk slowly and stay close." We soon found our bearings thanks to the unusually tall tree that I saw right before losing everyone. Not long after, we found Christian lying on the ground unconscious. It took a minute, but we woke him up. He was bleeding a little from the dome of his head. It seemed like he hit his head on something while taking a tumble. I told Brandon that he should take Christian back to the campsite and that I would continue looking for Ryan. But Christian said he would rather die than abandon Ryan. So we continued the search together. We searched for about an hour when the storm subsided dramatically and the sky was getting dark. We stopped to talk things over. We spoke about our options, and I told the guys that it was best that we went to the main campground to call for help. Christian disagreed and said that we should continue looking for Ryan. But that's what Christian would say. Sometimes it's a good thing and sometimes not so much. Christian doesn't know how to take a step back. In the end though, cooler heads prevailed and we took Christian to the campground. Storm picked up again soon after, and unfortunately, help didn't arrive until the next morning. The storm had completely cleared in the morning, and about a dozen people went to search for Ryan with me and Brandon guiding them. The search continued for a week, and the number of search and rescue crew doubled by that point, but Ryan was never seen again. During that time, Christian continued to tell the rescue crew that Ryan was grabbed by something big and insisted that it wasn't a bear. He said that it was too fast and nimble for it to be a bear and that it was wearing a white fur. So unless they could prove that polar bears have migrated to Utah, it wasn't a bear. They ceased the search after 12 days. We couldn't even find a single piece of Ryan's gear in all that time, let alone his body. We all came back home, then sometime thereafter, we all gathered again for Ryan's funeral, one that had to happen without his body. I haven't gone camping again since losing Ryan. It's not that I fear the woods, but more like it brings back sad memories. It's different for Christian though. He swears till this day that an unknown creature had taken Ryan, and I believe him too. Something dragged all of us through inches of snow, and that force snapped a paracord rated to 550 pounds. I didn't see the creature with my own eyes like Christian had, but I know it must have been huge, fast, and extremely powerful. I just hope that Ryan was unconscious when the end came. I hope that he didn't feel anything. I truly hope he's in a better place now. I've been awake in this world that we call reality for the past 42 years. I've had childhood, went through puberty, attended college, got married and divorced, so I lived a life that isn't much different from everyone else's. My life was tumultuous to say the least. I could never have deep, meaningful relationships with anyone, and that includes my family. The lack of stability and structure made it impossible for people to truly know me. So why am I like that? That's a good question, but my answer is somewhat complex. Imagine waking up every morning and spotting little differences in your life from the day before. It could be something as insignificant as the color of your coffee table. But at times, the change could be something as shocking as your best friend no longer being alive even though you've met him the day prior. That's been my life for the past 40-odd years. There was a time when I thought I may have some sort of mental disorder. I saw doctors and other professionals for answers, but every single one of them came up with the same conclusion. There's nothing wrong with me. Physically, my brain is firing in all cylinders. I haven't done anything crazy in my life, and so I'm normal as they come. Last week, I was a married man. Now mind you, I don't remember ever getting married. But then I woke up this morning, and as it turns out, I'm now divorced. I now deal with these sudden and drastic changes fairly well. I've done this all of my life, pretending to be someone that I'm not. So life is depressing, but I keep chugging along. I've always wondered how these changes were happening. Am I in the same reality but with the world around me changing? Or perhaps I can somehow move from one alternate universe to another. It's a tough one to figure out since the changes are normally small and I oftentimes don't spot them for days at a time. However, something different happened about 2 months ago. You see, I woke up in a completely different world. I was still on planet Earth, and therefore I'm not talking about ending up in an alien planet. It was different in a way that the world as we know it has ceased to exist in their reality. I couldn't find a single person on the streets. The buildings around me were fairly intact, meaning the population wasn't wiped out by some sort of war. But nature was already reclaiming the land, and so there were overgrown plants and trees everywhere. I tried starting the cars left on the streets, but all of the batteries in them were dead. Some of them could turn on the interior lights dimly, but the engine wouldn't turn over. Whatever catastrophe might have happened there, it must have happened at least 3 to 4 months ago. There were random bodies on the streets, but not enough of them to account for all the disappearances. I'm not a doctor, but the stage of decomposition was also a clue that the people had been dying only a few months ago. I walked around a little more when I came across a quarantine zone. It was a makeshift facility that was barricaded with fences on all sides, and I saw about 24 large tents within it. I may have been about a bus length away from the main entrance when my body reacted to the stench in the air, and I began walking away from the quarantine zone. I took off my sweater, rolled it into a small ball, then covered my mouth and nose with it. I began to circle the fences to get a better view of the inside of the facility. I didn't have to go too far. There were mountains of bodies inside. I had never seen so many dead people in my life. My body reacted again before my brain even had the chance to comprehend what I was seeing. I think I regurgitated everything I had in my stomach. I walked away from the quarantine zone to get away from the stench, but also to find water. I was dehydrated from vomiting and my body felt heavy, very heavy. A couple of blocks away, I saw a 7-Eleven and entered the store in hopes to find something, anything to drink. There was absolutely nothing in the fridge or on the display shelves. The store was cleaned out long ago. I walked toward the corner in the store and kicked away the debris on the floor. I wanted to sit down and rest a bit. I don't know if it was the exhaustion or the shock, but I soon fell asleep, or maybe I lost consciousness. I can't be sure. When I came to, I was no longer in that reality. I was back in the world where people are still alive. It felt like I was given a second chance in life, but sadly, the feeling didn't last long. In that new reality, I was an addict and homeless. My family had disowned me and my life was in shambles. There was no way of repairing all the wrongs. Thankfully, that life only lasted a week. But more and more bad experiences, or rather negative realities, are becoming more of common destinations. The changes used to be much less impacting than they have been lately. I'm truly afraid of where I might end up tomorrow. I send you this story as a way of marking the changes in my life. When I wake up tomorrow, I truly hope I'll wake up in a world where people are living, where life is for the most part normal, and where I can find the trace of my story on your channel. I'm afraid to fall asleep. I fear where I might end up when I wake up. Okay, I'll warn you right now, I don't really know how scary my experience will be when judged by someone a little more courageous than I am. I'm not a coward, but I get startled easily, and I'm definitely not the fearless type. I'm really just a normal guy. I want to make that clear before I tell you my story. We have to rewind the clock to about a month from today, and the time of the day was around 6 in the evening. I got out of my office and had to take a taxi or a Uber because my car was in the shop. I would have taken an Uber, but I saw a taxi stopped at a red light and I didn't feel like waiting for a ride. I had forgotten to schedule a ride with Uber before I was done with work. As you might have guessed, I hailed a taxi when the traffic light turned green and hopped inside when the driver stopped for me. As soon as I got in, I said, "Hey, how are you?" and then gave the driver my address. The car began moving, but the driver didn't utter a single word in that time. No hi or okay, I got ya. He said nothing and just drove. It's a little weird, but I just figured he's not the happy type. I was playing a game on my phone and didn't pay much attention to the outside for about 5 minutes. So when I looked up to glance at the street outside, I started to see that the driver was taking me to the opposite direction from my home. I said, "Sir, you are going in the wrong direction. Can you confirm my address?" And then I repeated my address to him. I waited for at least 20 seconds for him to say something, but he just kept driving. So then I angrily told him, "Stop the car, I'm getting off. Stop the car." He did stop moments later, but only because he was stuck at a red light. I tried to open the rear doors, but the locking mechanisms in the rear didn't function. By that point, I was 100% sure that I was riding with a psycho. I had to get out. I kicked his chair with all of my strength and kept at it until it actually began tilting forward as if the gears inside the chairs were coming loose due to the immense force I was hitting it with. I saw the light change to green and the psycho began moving again. But instead of going in full speed, he slowed the car down and parked it right in front of an apartment building. The strangest thing happened next. The psycho actually began crying, not like sobbing out of sadness, but it seemed like he was angry at the situation that he was in. It was a cry of frustration more than anything. After about a minute of listening to him crying, I had to say something. "If you don't open the door, one of us is going to die tonight. Don't think for a second that I'm back for my life. I'm gonna give you a fight. You better believe that." That's when I could hear the door unlocking, and so I quickly opened it, then jumped out of the taxi faster than you could say fudge. Outside, I got my phone out and took a picture of the license plate before the psycho sped off. I went to the police straight away and reported the incident in complete detail. It was obviously too late to track down the car, and I was fully expecting that. What I didn't expect was for the license plate to be registered to an eventual stolen car. And what I mean by that is the fact that the taxi was later reported stolen. Thereby, the picture of the license plate didn't help in any way to catch the perp. The stolen taxi was found a day later in a warehouse district 3 miles away from where I was dropped off. The psycho has not been seen since the night of the happening, and therefore I didn't get to find out the real reason behind the attempted kidnapping. I have a feeling that I may have been the first trial run for a virgin future serial killer. His first attempt was foiled by an overly aggressive victim, but the psycho learned something from it. And that's a bad news for the next person who will get caught napping by the psycho. Because he'll be better prepared, he won't be as nervous, and I'm sure he'll be much hungrier for a kill. Four years ago, I had a brain surgery after a serious beating I received from multiple gang members. I only remember getting hit in the head with a baseball bat, and the rest is blank. A cashier in a deli grocery store saw the whole thing. She called the emergency services and I was taken to the hospital. In the operating room, the doctors had to get inside my skull to stop a hemorrhage, and that's how I was saved. As the person that I am today, I wish I could tell you that I was a decent man who got tangled in an unfortunate situation. But the truth is, I was beat up by rival gang members. I did not live a good life prior to my brain surgery. I was a pathetic gangbanger. What happened after the brain surgery was a change in personality. Actually, that's putting it too simply. It was more than that. I began to see everything differently, and so I treated everything and everyone differently. I used to be an aggressive person, the attacking type, but today I'm calm as the clear night skies. I don't know if it was the severe impact that I received with the bat or if something happened during surgery, but something must have happened to my brain on that fateful day because it has changed me into a completely new man. In fact, the changes were so dramatic that even till this day, my sister thinks that I'm putting on an act. For what reason I would do that, I don't know, but she thinks I'm full of it, which sadly is a testament to how poorly I lived my life prior to the assault. So in a nutshell, I lost the aggression in me due to the accident. But it wasn't a pure loss because I had actually gained something from it as well. Today, I have the ability to read, remember, and predict patterns in people. For example, I work with a college professor currently. Well, it's more like that I'm a test subject, but I do get paid and it has been my main source of income for several years now. In my teenage years, I haven't attended a single day of high school, but nowadays I get to see, speak, and mingle with lots of college students Monday through Friday. I look at them and I'm able to make mental notes of their habits. The little detail, like how Mandy likes to be seated alone for 3 to 5 minutes after entering the lab before she's fully able to interact with others. She needs a warm-up like an old car in cold weather. Bobby, on the other hand, is self-aware that he's too hyper-energetic. When he has to be seated, he uses tremendous amount of physical strength to put tension in his leg muscles to try to release some of that pent-up energy. I pick up on those small details and habits, then build the mental profiles of the individuals I interact on a daily basis. After a while, I'm able to predict their actions and speeches to a degree. That's the simplified explanation of my newfound ability. It's hard to explain it in words on how I see the world. But if I really had to explain it so a normal person could understand it, I would tell them that it's like picking up a scent. Like a wolf smells something and it instantly recognizes that the scent belongs to an intruder or perhaps to a member of its own pack. It's instinctive as much as it's learned. So when you examine the entire study of Professor Lang's, the students involved in the experiment are also test subjects as much as I am. Although there are some clear differences, such as my brain getting scanned and mapped, the same contractual responsibility does not apply to the students. I also share my findings with the professor, and by findings I'm speaking of the mental profile that I continue building on the students. With that information, we assess each individual's trajectory in terms of academic achievement, mental health, and social hierarchy. My findings have proven to be very accurate so far, to a degree that it scares me a little. But we'll discuss that later in the story after I tell you what happened a couple of years back. I began working with the professor 3 years ago. After a year, I told him I wanted to quit, and that was mainly because I was making so much money playing poker. Upon being informed of my resignation, the professor asked me how much I was making. I jokingly told him that he couldn't afford me, but the only funny part of the statement was my tone because I really was making a ton of money playing poker. With that being told, the laugh didn't last long. Professor Lang offered quite a substantial amount a year of salary to continue working on his project, and that's when it dawned on me that he was working for an entity that's much bigger than the university that was fronting the study. This became clear as day when the direct deposits to my bank account began arriving from some shell company after I had accepted the bump in salary. I didn't want to accept the offer, but it's not like I had an option. When Professor Lang offered more money, I told him that I still wanted to quit. That's when he strongly suggested that I should really reconsider. He told me that my life could get much more difficult if I refused the offer. He also used cryptic language to stress the fact that he didn't have control over the study. He was basically trying to tell me that the friendly threat wasn't coming from him, but rather from someone much more prominent. That is why I continue to participate in the project, and I still do till this day. I'm unable to provide you with full details of the study, but I can tell you that it's being used to create an algorithm which will combine the use of specialty cameras, for instance ones with facial recognition features, along with various sensors to replicate my ability, if you can call it that. Although not by 100%, I'm able to hypothesize the basic traits of any individual within minutes of seeing them, and I do it at a high rate of success. As you might imagine, an ability like that can be used in many different applications, but not many that you can estimate as being positive. In my hands, the worst that I can do is to win some money at a poker game. But imagine if a private corporation got a hold of it. Just how many people's career will such algorithm alter? What about the government? They could build an entire database of its citizens to create a near-accurate profile of every individual and use that to target specific persons, alter political decisions, and even influence elections. I never thought of the consequences that would befall for bringing my ability to light. At first, I didn't think I had it, but during Professor Lang's study, it was proven to be real. After that, I thought I was doing a good thing by using my ability to live a new life, a better one. Now I feel danger looms closer as we near the completion of the study. Once I'm no longer needed to create the new algorithm, would the people in charge want me around? I'm the only person who can prove the algorithm's existence with my ability. I could potentially put those who are funding the study in hot seats. Even to me, it makes perfect sense to get rid of me. I tell you my story because I feel like it should be told to someone. I've contacted reporters to speak about the study, but not one person took me seriously. I've come to an understanding that I will not be able to bring this issue to light. I just wanted to tell it to someone. I'd like to be remembered by at least a few people. That is all.